Hello everyone. Okay, as we discussed in the last lesson, the appointment of Supreme Court judges is highly contested, very politicised, an issue of great controversy in the United States. And part of that reason is due to these judicial philosophies which the Supreme Court judges have. And this is going to be the focus of today's lesson. Before we do so, though, let's just remind ourselves about why it's so important, the Supreme Court appointments. It's partly because of the length of tenure. These judges, they're probably one of the few appointments presidents make, probably the only appointment presidents make, who regularly are expected to outlast the president politically and sometimes in terms of life as well. So, for example, Anthony Kennedy, who retired in 2018, I think he was, he'd been appointed by Ronald Reagan in 1988. Reagan left office in 88, 89. Reagan died in the mid-1990s, so he outlives the president physically by about 25 years on the court, and he outlives him politically by over 30 years. So that makes it really important positions. The other reason is largely down to the power of the Supreme Court, and this is due to judicial review, which we discussed in a previous lesson. And in particular, it's this phrasing in Marbury versus Madison, where the Supreme Court basically said it is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. In other words, it's our job to interpret the Constitution, it's our job to interpret the law. And this makes the court really powerful, because if the law is a little on the vague side, a little wishy-washy, not kind of crystal 120% clear, it means the judges will have the power to interpret what the law means. And of course, some judges will interpret what the law means slightly differently to other judges. And this is why the philosophy of the judges is so important. And it's also why it's highly fought over. Conservative presidents, Republican presidents, often want one type of justice. More liberal, Democrat, normally presidents want a slightly different type of justice. As a note, by the way, never ever ever in essays describe the judges or the justices as Republican or Democrat. Always describe them as liberal or conservative with a small c and a small l. Never say Democrat justices or Republican justices. Right, so we're going to look at the first philosophy of judges or judicial philosophy, which is judicial activism. And this is, I suppose, should really rename in some ways. Judicial liberal activism might be a more accurate phrase. Okay, and they see really important that one of their main duties is to ensure the political reality of the Constitution is met. In the preamble of the Constitution, the bit which kind of like the introduction, I suppose, for argument's sake, it says that the purpose of the Supreme Court is the purpose of the Constitution is to establish justice, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty. And judges from this philosophy believe that part of their interpretation needs to be to ensure that this main aim and objective of the Constitution is met. So, some of the key ideas and beliefs of judicial activists, they argue that the Constitution was written in broad, flexible language. And, as we've looked at the Constitution before, there are quite a lot of bits, aren't there, which are fairly kind of broad and wishy-washy. From time to time, the president will do this, for example. And they believe that was done for the reason, and the reason was that the Founding Fathers recognised that the Constitution had to be flexible, had to kind of meet the demands of future societies, and therefore it has to be interpreted in this broad way in order to meet what are the current circumstances, societal circumstances of the United States. It cannot just be fossilised, they argue, in 1787. Society's moved on. These judges are willing to overturn precedents, that means previous decisions made by the Supreme Court. They're also willing to overturn decisions made by other branches in order to meet the demands of modern society. A decision made by the Supreme Court 100 years ago may not be applicable or I think another word, but may not meet kind of the current kind of circumstances of modern day society. And I suppose you could argue, the Supreme Court in the 1890s passed Plessy versus Ferguson. We said that segregation was fine, okay, separate but equal. But in the 1950s, with black schools, white schools, the whole civil rights movement, the Supreme Court said, actually, you know what, that isn't fine anymore, and they overturned that decision. So judicial philosophy on the activism side, or the liberal activism side, very much believe that should overturn precedents of previous decisions. And they're unapologetic about what they're sometimes accused of, which is legislating from the branch. What this means is they're often accused of actually interpreting the Constitution very broadly and essentially making public policy, something which Congress should do or the presidency should do. I suppose things like abortion rights are a very good example of that. But this group's saying, well, we need to do it. The Constitution is quite broad and flexible. We need to make sure it's relevant to the modern world. And they see protecting minority rights is really important. Again, to go back to the aim of the Constitution, establish justice, promote general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty. That should include minority rights as well as the majority as well. And they are not afraid, from this view, of holding politicians to account, overturning decisions which have been made by the elected branches if they feel that those laws and decisions are going against, as I said, the aim of the Constitution about establishing justice, welfare, and the blessings of liberty. So, judicial activism then, in action, so to speak. My screen's just make a bit bigger. So, here's some examples of judges being activist. This case, which we've come across before, Oberfell versus Hodges, I think that's how you say it. Anyway, this is the case where it said all states had to recognise same-sex marriage and all state laws which banned it were unconstitutional. So a number of states had laws which said that same-sex marriage was wrong and you shouldn't have it in their counties and all the rest of it. This Supreme Court decision said actually that is unconstitutional. It's also an example, isn't it, of federalism, of the federal government growing in size, telling the states what they can and cannot do. So it fits into those types of essays as well. Now, this comes about largely through something called the 14th Amendment and something called the Equal Protection Clause and the Due Process Clause. And quite a lot of the interpretations around same-sex marriage, this is also the basis behind Roe versus Wade, which legalised abortion, or more accurately, should I say, it banned the laws, or overturned the laws which banned abortion. So, the Due Process Clause, it says, no person, this is in the Constitution, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty or property, and this is why it's called the Due Process Clause, without due process of law. The 14th Amendment also says, nor shall any state deny to any person within its jurisdiction the, quote, equal protection of the law. These two elements of the clause have been interpreted by judicial activists to mean that no state can deprive, when it says life, liberty and property, it means that no state can deprive a person of doing what they like with their life, liberty or property. In other words, if two people want to have same-sex marriage, then that is their right. That fits into life, liberty and property. If, an individual wants to have an abortion, again, that is their life, liberty and property. It's their body, isn't it? Which they can do with as they please. And so therefore, no state from the 14th Amendment can deny any person the equal protection of the law. In other words, you can't have one law which says that this group of people cannot have an abortion, or this group of people cannot have sex with people of the same sexual orientation, because that is not equal protection. It's treating one group differently to another group. And the activists have read this, because obviously the 14th Amendment was made really about slavery, saying that black people had to be treated the same as white people. But they've looked into this wording, which is quite vague, and then have looked into future rights, same-sex marriage and abortion rights, which obviously wasn't the original intention, one assumes anyway, of the people who wrote the 14th Amendment in 1865, was it? Something around that, wasn't it? This decision, Roe versus Wade, and actually, sorry, not Roe versus Wade, this decision, Oberhill versus Hodges, it actually overturned as well a previous Supreme Court case called Baker versus Nelson. So again, we've got this idea that judicial activists are happy to overturn decisions made by the court in the past. Now, on the Conservative side, two of the staunchest Conservatives who we're going to meet probably in the next video, Justice Scalia and Justice Thomas, who are probably two of the most conservative judges on the Supreme Court. Well, Scalia's not anymore, he's dead, but before he died he was. They wrote a dissenting opinion. This means they wrote an opinion which said why they disagreed with the 5-4 case, which agreed on Oberhill versus Hodges. And they said at the time of the 14th Amendment, same-sex marriage would have been unconstitutional and so must be seen in the same way today. In other words, the 14th Amendment was about black rights, nothing to do with gay rights. Activists, though, say, well, it's not all that clear, it's a bit vague and wishy-washy, and actually it just talks about equal protection of people, and if you're treating one group different to another group, that is not equal protection. So you can see kind of the power of these judges and trying to interpret these words of the Constitution and how they come to very different conclusions just because of their interpretations. Now, this view has been criticised, as you may well expect. One criticism is that these judges are imposing their own values on the Constitution and going away from what the original meaning of the Constitution is. Many argue it leads to an overstrong judiciary because they're effectively legislating from the bench. Should it not be Congress who should decide, the elected politicians who should decide gay marriage? Why is it 9 unelected judges? Should it not be elected politicians who decide abortion rights, like what happened in the UK? Why is it these unelected judges? Another criticism made is that most other laws are dead, i.e. they can only be changed by repealing them or whatever. Why should the Constitution be seen as different? Why is the Constitution seen by these judges as a living document, one that can be amended and interpreted in different ways? What makes the Constitution like a special set of laws which are still alive and can still be amended and still can be interpreted differently, which is not true for other laws? Okay, the current activists on the Supreme Court, obviously we did have the late Justice Ginsburg, was very much an activist. There's now only 3 judges on the current Supreme Court who can be considered activists. They are Justice Breyer, who was appointed by Bill Clinton, Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who was appointed by Barack Obama, and Justice Elena Kagan, who again was also appointed by Barack Obama. So Democrat presidents often appoint these more liberal activist judges on the Supreme Court. And again, they often share their kind of general view of Democrat president, protecting minority rights, extending the role of the state, etc., etc. Okay then, the next video will then deal with the next couple of philosophers.